As a certified Java trainer, do you also hate Eclipse?
I absolutely do.
Hey friends, this is Podcast Ruined by Software Engineer. On this episode, I get to talk to Sze Wong, founder and CEO of Zerion Software. Zerion Software develops technology to help teams perform better field data collection. If you enjoy Podcast Ruined by Software Engineer, don't forget to hit the follow button on your podcast app so you don't miss out on the new episodes. And you can pick up podcast merch at perrytiu.com/shop. Enjoy the episode. Welcome back to another episode of Podcast Ruined by Software Engineer. I'm your host, Perry. Today with me is Sze Wong, founder and CEO of Zerion Software. Sze, how are you today?
Hello. Great. Thanks for having me.
No, I think it's an absolute pleasure because as people will discover, your story is an absolutely great journey, Like seeing a company grow for over 2 decades, not very many people get to say that. But then all the stories within it, but also what you're doing today, I can't wait to uncover all that. But before I go too deep into all that, who is Sze and what is Zerion Software?
Oh, wow. That's a tough question. Who am I? I mean, usually I just say I'm the tech guy and end there. Right. So not great for podcasting, right? So like I grew up in Hong Kong and got into computing, if you will, when I was in fifth grade. So I got my Apple II at the time. It's in the 80s. Um, and I got into computing and fell in love, and basically it. At the time, like when I went through high school, I was actually determined to be an electrical engineer. I thought, right? So I was like, I'm loving this thing. I'm going to be a chip designer for some odd reason. And then I applied to school universities in the U.S. Came over to the U.S. Thought I will get into double E, but then I fell in love with software. I learned that actually very quickly after the first semester, I've determined that actually I love software more than hardware. So I graduate computer science, and that was it. And so we founded Zerion. Well, actually, the story was I found Zerion originally in 2003, just trying to escape working for other people. Just want to do something, and there was no goal, right? So like I wrote in my book, every founding story is like romantic. That you get this big idea. No, it wasn't like that. But I too can tell you one version of that, right? Which is um, what reporters would say. But the reality is, I just didn't want to work for people, so I start doing whatever, right? So that's 2003. Start consulting, doing whatever, and then by 2008, you all know what happened. The iPhone came out, and then by fall of 2008, that is when the iOS was announced. So yeah, so we basically jumped headfirst. I told my partner at the time, Chris, and I basically say, just get any mobile contracts you could. We're going to only work on mobile. I had no idea what it was, right? So I still remember that summer, my parents was visiting U.S. and when we went on a cruise, the weekend prior to we jump on the cruise, I bought my Mac, the first Mac. I had an Apple II. I never had a Mac, so I bought my Mac at that summer and wrote my first mobile app on the cruise ship. And then came back and basically I said, let's jump headfirst into this mobile thing. And then iPhone Builder, which is the product that ended up making quite a little bit of money, was released in April of 2009. So like between that fall of 2008 to April of 2009 is when everything changed. So in a nutshell, what is Zerion Software is a data collection company the maker of iPhone builder, and we specialized in mobile data collection, offline mobile data collection.
Yeah, even that term, like I can't wait to jump into it. Honestly, we have a bit of time together to jump into all these terms to figure it out. Like, what is data collecting? I feel like it's very aggressive nowadays, where people are like, "Oh, it's like Google's tracking all your kind of stuff." But no, we're talking
Right.
about like inventory. One of the examples that I definitely know about this is like inventory, mobile stuff. Like, I could geek into that in just a little bit. But thanks for sharing a lot of even just a bit of landscaping, because I keep on saying that like we all end up in tech somehow, whether you want it or not. We could look at a team today, everybody does tech, but our backgrounds are so different, and that's the beauty of it. The pleasure of having you on the show is, hey, let's learn a couple lessons, but also like if we think about ourselves like growing up kind of thing, maybe from your environment, because I love talking about this, is thanks for already telling us what was your first computer. I asked this to literally every single guest. But what is kind of interesting to me is that like that wasn't in a different environment. You said you grew up in Hong Kong. Some of the viewers know that my parents are from Hong Kong. I was born and raised in Canada, but I have a very fond attachment to Hong Kong and it. So my question to you in that aspect is, I know Hong Kong from the perspective of like outsiders, like it's very like the Wong Gao movies. But then like from your perspective growing there, I'm gonna ask the first question is like, what did it look like growing up in a sense of technology? What I mean by that is that when I grew up, there was already influences of like, my dad was a geeky person. He would like pick up scraps of computers and like build Frankenstein computer. Windows 95 was my first version of Windows. But those are kind of like my exposure to like floppy disks, and like the other kids would come back with like an iPod kind of thing. So maybe from your childhood during that time, do you remember any kind of like influences, whether it's technology, whether it's a person around you that gave you this like tech like seed in your brain, that kind of thing about it? What did it grow up as a kid in Hong Kong along with technology, basically?
Right. So focus on Hong Kong. You all have to remember, I'm much older than most of you listening to this podcast. So I was born in the 70s. So by going 80 is when I first get into computing, if you will. So I don't exactly remember when Apple II was released, but somewhere along late 70s, early 80s, right? Um, when Apple One and Apple Two was released. Now, so Hong Kong at the time was a couple years behind the U.S. So I think I got my Apple in early 80s, right? So I don't remember exactly. But to answer your question, this was a extremely different era than what you all mostly will be growing up in. There was no computer, right? There was no concept of telecommunication, right? So our phone lines were dial up. There was no internet, right? I didn't have internet until I graduate from college. So it was extremely different. Like I got my Apple, right? So what do? We play games. I learned basic programming, right? The language called Basic that summer, and I still remember the computer lab that I have downstairs to our apartment. Um, they don't have floppy disks. So at the time, like my Apple has the big flat 5.25 inch floppy disk. That is very advanced. The lab downstairs has cassette tape. So it was just crazy. Like, so I still remember like in that first lesson, first like week of lesson, they will teach you how to load up the OS into the computer. And the way to do that is we wind the tape to the beginning and start playing, and you will see the countdown. Like you will specifically play until it says 010 and then stop right there. Okay? So you actually hit the pause button because these are two separate devices. You're managing what goes into the computer, like the it's crazy. Um, and once you get to 010 and you hit pause, then you turn on the computer and you continue to play. That will start playing the OS into the computer. That's how you load the operating system. Um, but going back to answering your question, what influenced me is basically, I mean, um, one older neighbor, got an Apple II. Like, I think he's like 5 years older than me. He got a computer. So At the time, okay, also, most of my classmates gets the Nintendo, and me and this neighbor, this older neighbor, was the only person like that get computer. So most people were playing Nintendo games, and we did not. And my mom was like, "You're not going to," like my mom said, she's not going to buy Nintendo for me ever. So I was stuck playing video games on an Apple on an Apple machine, right? On Apple II. And then now, I mean, it actually turned out to be awesome. Like I was like, I like how can this happen? Like everybody was playing Mario, Super Mario, like all those like Donkey Kong, and I'm stuck with this green screen, and I have to type to get into a game, and it doesn't play on the TV. But of course, in hindsight, that was the push, the nudge that forced me to go through go through a lot of trouble in order to play games, and many of the trouble was end up being forced me to like well I wouldn't say force me like allow me to get into programming, and I fell in love um, when I was in high school. Programming and computing is already my identity at that time.
Yeah, which is obviously much early. I mean, nowadays it's like you always hear it was like kids are already learning about coding, but like back then, as you're saying, it's a different, complete beast. Even for me, like my first actual like coding happened in university. So like for a lot of people, like I do software engineering nowadays, like nearly every single day. But like everybody gets that at a different point. But even you during high school at that time is already an outlier with all that kind of stuff. So that's great. Before I move on from like the childhood in Hong Kong, I got some quick fire questions because like I'm absolutely geeking out about this. But the one that I always love hearing is nowadays for the people who know a little bit about Hong Kong is there's this one area that does everything computer near Samtopo Golden Computer Arcade. That's where all the techie stuff. If you ever go to Hong Kong, that's where it is. But my quick fire question to you was like, was it already like that back then? Was it already that area that like
Yes.
dominated that corner over there?
Oh my god. Like so my so my parents, like any Asian parents, wants their kids to learn musical instrument, right? So I was learning piano. So my piano lesson was Saturday at 4 p.m. I would tell my mom I'm going on my piano lesson. I'll leave home at 10 a.m. And the reason is I go to that computer arcade and I'll just go around circle from 11 o'clock is when most of these shops start to open up. And I'll just go walk around until 4 o'clock in the afternoon every Saturday. And that's basically where I spent a lot of my teenage years and learn a lot, talk to shop, and yeah. So that place it's already around at in late 80s, yeah, even early 90s. It was I would even say is more booming back then than now, because it went through many era, right? So you think about it, there was when I was growing up is when PC, right? PC, the 836 ish, Apple era, Mac era, and then when you get to the mobile era, that place turned more into selling laptops, PlayStation games, and these new other things, right? So it's still great, right? So nowadays I still like when I visit, I still go there. Yeah, but exactly, it was already like that for yeah. That means for decades it's been all of us where we. I mean, I tell people like if you shop there, you would have met me when I was
Right.
in when I was like 12 years old, 13 years old, because I was always there on every Saturday. So,
That's incredible. I'm so glad I get to ask this question from the point of view of somebody who actually like, lived that experience, right? I come to think of that. It's still available, by the way. What is it? Golden Computer Arcade Center in Hong Kong. Definitely go check it out. It's definitely available. I'm very fortunate. I get to go visit it once in a while as well. So that piece in time obviously influenced you, but maybe many, many other people out there. Before we jump into the section where how you got to America, that's always the fun part to all of this is maybe the people around you already mentioned that like you already had a good influence in your neighbor, for example, somebody who's like maybe in the same situation and also know how to be curious about a tool. I think that's the important part, is being curious about it. But would you say that was kind of like the uncommon path? What I mean by that is that, like, for example, when I grew up, like, once one person has a computer, then nearly 50%, 60%, 70% of people would have computers and iPods and everything. So it kind of just like, I took it for granted that my interest in using a computer kind of is the same as everybody. But your like proportions must have been completely different. Out of 100 kids around there, you and your neighbor probably the 2% of like everybody who had it. Is that correct?
Right. So I got my first computer when I was in my fifth grade. It's not until, I would say, not until high school era, ninth grade, that other kids in my grade start to have PCs. So I was the only one, like even having a PC at home for 4 years. So it's actually not the norm. Actually, even at like when you get to high school, like the equivalent of 11th grade, 12th grade, um, I was among the very, very few who were typing our reports on computer. There were other kids who were typing reports on a like an electronic typewriter, but very few had computer to do the reports on. Now, we didn't have AI, right? So I mean, even publishing, what was called publishing, was a new thing. So a computer at the time was basically just a glorified typewriter. But I had a computer, had two printers. Yeah, so that was very, very different. I mean, and because of that, I became the computer person, right? So anybody who needs computer needs, they want to print something, I'm the one. I mean, so that, yeah, so that set up my identity, and I love it. Yeah, so that's the environment. Very, very different.
I just love picturing all this happening in that very, very fast paced setting already. Because if people don't know about Hong Kong, it's very fast paced, if anything.
Super.
So, of course, on top of that, that's amazing. So, thanks for sharing so many of it. I can spend hours and years talking about Hong Kong, the environment over there, but the story kind of brings you to the point where like we get a picture of like how you grew up, and I keep on saying it's so fascinating. But eventually, with your interest, with your passion, with your drive, you kind of get to the point where it's like, hey, America, that's a possibility. That's definitely something that happens. And you eventually do manage to get into University of Maryland, if I got that correctly, which is it Go Terps, if I got that correctly?
Go Terps. Yeah.
Exactly. But maybe from your point of view, when you got there, that's always what I can't imagine, right? It's from I don't know if everybody agrees with this, but it's from the little leagues to the major leagues, right? This is the part where it's like, sure, you were the 2% of whatever it is, but once you get into a university setting, for many people, even for myself, most of the time high school, like your sixth form, you don't really get this like specialized thing. But when you get to the major league, everybody has had this interest. You're not the only person anymore that had exposure to that. So maybe from your perspective of when you got into university in a foreign land, I don't know if you've ever been to America even before that.
No.
What did that look like in a sense of, did it meet your expectation? Did it not meet your expectation of studying in America? What did that look like?
It was very, very odd, right? So at the flight that I took from Hong Kong to the U.S. was actually only the second time that I ever been on an airplane, right? So the first time was a vacation, and then the second time I'm like away from my family for a long time. So did that? What is that like? Did it match my expectation? I can tell you, like there huge, extreme amount of cultural shock. And I always tell this story. I like week two, I call mom and it's like, "Hey, mom, do you realize McDonald's here? It's a house, like it's a standalone building. Like, isn't that crazy?" Like I call home and that like encapsulates a lot of the cultural shock because things are just so dramatically different. Things are a lot bigger, a lot more room, a lot more people. UMD, where I went to, was a huge school, right? It's literally a separate town, right? College Park, it's a town on its own. A lot of people. So did it match my? Oh, absolutely, right. So I learned so much. I mean, step foot into the computer lab with all like Mac, PC, Next computer, Sun terminals. I was like in Candyland, right? So another story I usually tell is like when I went into school, is when the punch card machine is retired. So I was like the last few kids who got to see how a punch card machine was like how did it operate, right? So I remember that the people there was like, well, come on, like this is like the last time, it will be gone next week, kind of like. So when it was decommissioned. So yeah, expectation wise, there's another thing I want to point out is the education environment, and it's very different from where I grew up in Asia versus in the US or in North America. And it is a lot more relaxed. Now that could be because of cultural differences, or that's just what it's like in universities, right, versus high school. And I think even here, if you went to high school here and go to college, there's a different in how they what was expected of you. In university, in colleges, you're expected to study on your own. Nobody will push you. If you want to go play video game all day long, go smoke all day long, nobody cares. And amazingly, that fits my personality a lot more. I hate to be pushed, but like Hong Kong, Asia is all about pushing, right? All about forcing you to do things that was correct, and I'm doing air quotes here, right? And came in here very quickly. I felt that, hey, oh my god, like nobody pushes me, nobody yells at me. Nobody cares if I get A's or B's or C's or even go to class at all. Like this is crazy. Very very quickly, within the first month or two, I was like, oh my goodness. And then it clicks to me like I work harder, much much harder. I was like must be over 10 times harder than I was in when I was in Hong Kong. So in Hong Kong, I was like a mediocre. I was not bad, but like not the straight A's. Um, but once I was not forced, I end up working much harder. Um, so to answer your question, the environment that I got thrown into. Now I didn't go to MIT, right? So I don't know what that looks like, but I would imagine this is like kind of as MIT as I could get into, which is the RAM lab of UMD. If there's a UMD alum in the audience, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's in the basement of a garage, and it's full of probably hundreds of computers. I literally lived there in the RAM lab. There's no sunlight, so it's like a casino where you don't know what time that was, and you wake up sometimes like, oh my god, it's daylight. Like it's like daytime already. I went in there at like 8 p.m. and now it's already like 8 a.m. Something like that, right? So, yeah, it blew my mind, and it was a lot of fun, and I start studying a lot more seriously.
This whole time I was just grinning from like ear to ear in terms of like just hearing all these different like core memories of like, oh, the moment that you land in America, everything's so huge. It's obviously like a culture shock. Some people take it for granted that they've grow up in an environment that had so much space everywhere. But then when you're saying like it's night and day, that's one way to look at it. And the fact that you also made the most out of your experience studying at UMD, of course. Some people, as you were saying, it's a double-edged knife, right? Where, hey, I got all the time in the world, I could do whatever I want. Some people will literally just not do anything. But then, as we were saying, depending on people's how they grew up, their character and everything, like that might influence me, like, oh, I got so much time to organize myself and do what I could do best moving forward. So I'm so glad to hear that experience of being able to study, because you ended up doing your BSc, which is your bachelor's, and your graduate degree at University of Maryland as well, computer science. Correct. And then software engineering, if I got that correctly. Maybe for the people that are sort of interested in this is, I did comp sci at McGill, which is the major was in software engineering. I only did BSc at the end of the day. But a very quick crash course on computer science in, when did I do that? In the 2010s or something around there, is you go in, Java is always the first language that you do, and then you kind of add a little bit of C++, so that you learn a little bit about the memory allocations and the garbage cleaning and all that. And then eventually the classes kind of builds up into OSs, databases. You throw in a little bit of graduate courses, computer vision. I remember that I did a lot. And then eventually that's your BSc, and that's you graduate with it. Was that similar? Maybe as a quick crash course of like, was it very similar foundation blocks of like programming languages, and they build into some of like more structural stuff, and then after, what did that look like?
Yeah, it's amazingly similar, which is scary. So the first course, right? So like computer science 101 and 102 was in C++. Java was not there yet. And Java was there in like early 90. So when we graduate, that is when Java start to became a thing. So yeah, it was very similar. You learn programming languages. So we started in C++, and then there was logic, there was then compiler. You got to learn. There was one class I love, which is called computer languages. You got thrown into in one semester. You got to learn 4 languages, including Lisp. I don't know if your listener understand that. Like that was like a functional programming language, and 4 of these languages that you never heard of, and then in one semester you're expected to learn it and then apply it, and that is the classic learn to learn mentality, right? Now again, nowadays, learning on your own, it's like a normal thing when you're in elementary school, in high school, you go learn your own thing, right? Back then, learning on your own is not a thing. Like there's no YouTube, remember? There was no YouTube, there was no internet, okay? Your only way you gain knowledge is by reading and going to class. So learning to learn wasn't a thing. So that class I remember vividly because it was so hard. And like I think people were saying like after computer science 101 and 102, half the class dropped. And after logic, like algorithm, right? It's logic. Another half dropped. And then after programming languages, another half dropped, right? So like I don't know if it's real or not, but the class are indeed smaller. But I love that class the most. So in general, it's still very similar. You learn the languages, you learn the basic algorithm, and then yeah, like you said, it went into compiler, how computer works, memory, database. So one of my graduation class was relational database, and then system design, and then in grad school is mostly in systems.
I mean, even like there is a bit of contrast, but then you're saying like the core part of it is very, very similar. It's been a while on the show. Anybody has mentioned Lisp. It's been a while when people, I mean, we talk about like maybe OCaml, like Scheme and like Fortran, like those kind of pop up. And I'm sure you've definitely got to, You know what's funny is even like when I was in university, those do pop up here and there. Somebody had to tell us about OCaml, and I was like, tell me more. I'll listen about your currying or whatever to tell about us. I'm totally in for it. But, and also, as you guys might not tell the people listening, is that this show at the moment is currently ruined by 2 software engineers. This is usually what happens.
Completely ruined, right? So we can dive into like the debate on VI and Emacs.
Exactly. Once you give us a little bit of space, like we're not going anywhere. But maybe the last story I could talk about before we jump into like more of the entrepreneurial part, because obviously like there's so much to uncover on that one, is when you did mention the punch cards, you were the last, in quotation mark, generation, or like, the audience, the viewership to it. For the people who think about why bugs are called bugs, I don't know if this is true or not, you might correct me, but like punch cards, why it's relevant is because, think about it, you have a punch card, and usually how programs work, if I got that correctly, I obviously didn't do it myself, but it's a card, you make holes in them, and then you feed into a machine, and then the machine reads like the blank spaces, but then like the filled in spaces are like ones and zeros, so that's why the punch card makes sense. If there are bugs that accidentally end up on the punch card and either creates like a mark or something, that usually alters the actual code, which means it alters a program, which means that it might not function because of an actual physical bug. That's the story I've heard. Like, that's basically what the bugs and punch card kind of came together at some point, right?
Well, that's the same story I heard. I don't know if that's true or not, but I can imagine, right? So, I mean, the reason that story is spread is because it makes sense. The punch card. I mean, you can still, like, if you go to Computer Science Museum in California, in San Francisco, you can still see the punch card, or the tape. Actually, the punch tape. It's called punch card, but it's actually a tape because it. I mean, a card is so small. Yeah, but it's just ones and zeros, right? So if you imagine whatever instruction you want to load into computer eventually becomes ones and zeros, and the tape the tape has four holes, right? So like it can record 4 bits. The card is a little bit wider, bigger. I forgot. Don't quiz me on how big each card is. Um, and but yeah, it's how you load, right? So from punch card, it then evolved into cassette tape, which I mentioned. That's when I start learning. But the idea is the same. Like you load ones and zeros. Um, yeah. So it that the original bugs. That's the same story. I've never seen it. I've never seen. Like I was imagining a bug will eat a hole, right? So
Yep, yep.
you have a hole that was created by a bug, right? Yeah, but I cannot confirm that. Like that's real or not. But I heard the same story.
Oh, this is great. I mean, who said that this show was not educational at the end of the day? So,
Right, if you count that as educational.
well, the good part is that like eventually everybody gets into this scenario where it's like, oh, university, it ends at some point, right? It's happy, it's sad at the same time. But then now this is kind of where like not only from high school to university you get a bit of more control on what you get to do, but then once you're past university, this is like you got to figure out life now. A lot of people go through it today. A lot of people go through it 10 years ago, 20, 30 years ago, 50 years ago. People go through that. So maybe your journey in terms of we're bridging the gap between when you finished university and how Zerion Software got started. But like, did you immediately jump into a job? Like, is it a very traditional thing where you graduate, then you do a full-time job, and then like, everything's happy? Or what did that look like, that transition from the life of university into the life of real world?
Yeah, so I did work, right? So I didn't just became who I am today, right? So like, actually 1 year prior to graduation, three of us actually start like was like, well, let's go build a company, let's change the world, let's get rich in a year, maybe a year and a half, right? So so at year three of us got a contract. One of my friend was very outgoing, and his name is Andrew. If you're listening, um, and he got a contract. I think he was just talking to people and got a contract from a health club, and then they won their system redone. So we three college kids was like, well, yeah, of course we can do that. We can program Visual C++. We can make your health club, update your system. So we did that, and that's is when I like official story, if you will, is the first time I started my own company with two other friends. Now, so that eventually became nothing after we delivered that, and we didn't get another contract after that. And then we went our separate ways. Everybody graduated, and I did work. So this is when I say like people ask about regrets. This is the first I'll say regret, and I'll call it that. So looking back, I graduate pretty well in school, and so I get offers, right? So I mean it's just normal. Like you start to go into your third year, fourth year. People come to school. I mean, a lot of companies come to school to interview us, and I end up getting many offers. And looking back, I should have ignored all of the offers and just jumped to Silicon Valley. So we have friends who got into Microsoft. I didn't get into Microsoft. So at the time, I should have just worry about nothing. I mean, this is the concept that I tell young people now, that jump to the biggest pond you could while you can drown, while it's okay to drown. So just jump to the biggest pond. And then at the time, like today, I still would say, well, which pond would you jump to? Maybe still Silicon Valley, maybe Dubai. I've heard Dubai has great opportunity. But while you are like 19, 20, maybe 22, right before 25, just jump, go do crazy things. It doesn't matter, right? So at the time, now, of course, I didn't know, right? So I was like, well, getting a job is super important. And I have jobs. A lot of my friends don't have jobs. So I was so lucky. So I end up working for the company, the founder who gave me scholarship at the time. So he founded his own company. So I'm like, basically love his story, follow his footstep. He founded a scientific oriented company. He was a scientist, more traditional, real scientist, not like us fake computer scientists. Because
He said it. I did it. He said it.
right, because we never use test tubes, right? So you have to have lab coat and test tube to be a real scientist. So again, this person who gave me scholarship founded a scientific company, and I ended up working for them doing some scientific programming. And I felt extremely fortunate at the time. And I still should be, right? So like this opportunity was great. I learned a lot. But looking back, I should have just jumped to Silicon Valley, and maybe I end up bankrupting. But I would learn so much. Very similar to jumping over to the U.S. for college, because like when you change environment, a lot of the transferable you have a better chance of understanding your strength and then applying yourself when you put yourself in a unknown environment. So I would encourage anybody, if you're hearing this, if you're young, right? And actually, even if you're not young, which maybe we'll get into later, I'm not young anymore, but I still am taking chances. Take the biggest chance you can stomach. I know it's scary, but yeah. So looking back, I would jump to Silicon Valley, but I did start working for the scientific company. So I look back, and I think I worked for 10 years, like have a full-time job for 10 years. So
And you also said it very elegantly at that point, where it's like jump to the biggest pond. You know, people use different words of like take the leap of faith, and other people like just jump into the deep end and just figure it out kind of thing. But yeah, I kind of agree of this like Northern Star about this thing where it's like life just keeps on going, and responsibilities and dependencies and everything that kind of like matters kind of grows over the years. So like the earlier you kind of jump into these different scenarios, the less dependencies you have on other things, then yeah, you can probably explore a little bit on that. But maybe one of the cool thing that I was hearing you say about and obviously this is all brutal honesty. I feel like since the beginning of this episode, everything was just brutal honesty on that. Is that maybe the acknowledging part of like, if somebody offers you this chance to start a project with friends that you know from like a random contract that somebody was talking about, your attitude of saying yes and being like, why not? A lot of people would not always have that as a default option, but people do get presented this chance to do it. So I think like what I was trying to figure out when you were saying all that story is that like, I look at my day-to-day nowadays is that like, oh, these opportunities do come up. Am I the person to like be to accepting all of that? And the encouragement from your story of saying like, it could work out, it could not work out. But the moment you say yes is really what gives you the chance to actually, you know, try to do something. It could be big, it could be not big, but we're going to get into the next story of the Zerion Software, how you took that chance as well, and then how that turned out. But I think even just what you're describing has so many cool parts to it. So that's what I was thinking a lot of it. But then when we were talking about like working full-time and then also trying this like building a project or even a company on the side, a lot of people think about it, especially nowadays. But even back then, I'm sure there was a lot of encouragement. So for kind of somebody to look at it from your perspective at that time, working full-time and then this like idea of being like, when I was saying brutal honesty, but like, I just want to work for myself. And trust me, I probably say that just as often as I can about eating day-to-day kind of thing. How did that become a reality is what a lot of people want to hear about. So a lot of us, we work full time kind of thing. Sometimes you hear the story where it's like drop everything, give up everything, like we'll fund you maybe like a year at most, and like you'll figure that part out. But how did your story come about? Did somebody reach out to you, or was it just your own drive, and then you found a way to partially increase more and more time into Zerion Software? So how did that happen, and around when did that start?
Yeah. So nobody pushed me. It wasn't like my friend who wants to start a company pull me. It's not that. It's I've always been crazy, right? So I've always been felt lucky. That that was like a Google thing, but I always felt I was lucky. Um, so there was another chapter in between um, what after I graduate, work full time, and I think one of the key thing is that after this scientific company that I was talking about, I start to um, explore what I really want to do. Right. So at the time, actually, in early 2000s, that's in the dot com boom. I kind of missed that because of immigration. So like for a side story, which we won't go into detail, but because there was the last couple years that I need to like stay in the same job in order to go through my immigration process. So I didn't jump, but as soon as I was able to start, it's at the peak time. So like I hear all my friends like got great jobs, like hundreds of thousands of dollars of signing bonus, join this like dot com this, dot com that. Um, but at the tail end of that, I started a training school. You mentioned Perry, you mentioned that you learned Java in college. I was among the first who was certified and was able to teach on Java certification. So I started a Java training school here in DC, and then start teaching people certified Java programming, Java web development, Java architect, um, and that was a side job. At the time, I was working for a startup during the day, and then at night I would teach. So that was another chapter in my life where I love teaching. I love education, and then I start teaching. So that story was that. Oh yeah, so it reminded me, right? So how I got into that, it's because I know Java, and people know that I know Java. So I got a part time gig for teaching Java at a school, right? At some school, and then I learned that, oh my god, there's so much money in here. Like people just line up to learn Java, and because at the time, like remember, this is 99 2000 time, where it was at the peak of dot com boom, and you can get a job, like you can get a six-figure job right after boot camp. I mean, I think like the time is almost coming back to that. I mean, maybe a pre-pandemic was kind of like that. Um, so at the time, you go through a 6 week, sometimes 8 week boot camp, and now you can get a six-figure jobs. So a lot of people join. So I was like, oh my god, there's so much money. So like, why am I working for you? So I start my own training school. Just me. Just I rented a tiny classroom, and then I start there, right? So to answer your question, right? So like, it always is the desire to work for myself, to like, I mean, maybe that's cynical, as like the thought of why am I making money for you, right, kind of thing. um so that was the beginning. So that training school, I started that in it went for a few years. It was actually pretty good until dot com, the bubble burst, and I didn't know, right? So I was so focused on working during the day and teaching at night. At the peak time, I was teaching 7 days a week. And Monday through Friday, I taught 3 hours from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. And then on Saturday and Sunday, I taught 9 hours on each weekend days, morning, afternoon, and night, 3 hour chunk. And it will all be packed. I mean, like I was like, oh my God, I'm making so much money, but I was working like crazy, like full time during the day, every night, and I wasn't able to catch up in sleep at all. Like anything that would happen, like if I get a little bit tired, it will be this downward spiral. But so health wise, it was bad at that time, but I felt lucky that I was like being able to do this. And then the bigger environment, right? So like people are starting to not get jobs after boot camp, right? And at the time, the funny thing is, I was thinking, wait, how come enrollment starts to drop? And I wasn't thinking it's outer bigger influence. I was thinking, well, it must be me. I wasn't working hard enough. I didn't advertise enough. I didn't do whatever enough. So I do more. I start spending more on Google ad. I start taking out full page ad. Now, not on Washington Post, but on the local paper. Full page ad, still a lot of money to me, on advertising this training school. And I start putting more and more energy into doing more, getting it bigger, hiring more people, like doing more without realizing, hey, it may not be you, Z, until it's too late, right? So like, and then I end up packing up and closing that chapter, almost bankrupting. So that story was that I packed up overnight, right? So that at some point I realized, oh my God, like money is not matching, right? Although money coming in, but a lot going out, and start losing money without realizing how much of a hole I'm digging, keep digging bigger. And maybe luckily I woke up and say, oh my God, I have to cut this. So I pack up everything overnight and then move all the computers away from the school. And the next morning I went back to the location. I talked to the landlord and say, hey, I've already packed up. Please release my lease, because I signed, I think, like a 3-year, maybe a 5-year lease. Please release me, because otherwise I'll have to bankrupt. I'll have to declare bankruptcy. And you get nothing either way. So please be nice. So I don't have to go through bankruptcy. And he did release me. If he did not, I'll have to file for bankruptcy. I still lost a lot of money, still have to pay back a ton of credit card. But that was that chapter. And what I want to make sure I put in, I say this is, at that time, after that episode, I actually told myself, hey, I may not be cut out for the business world. I'm not good at running finances, doing this, and that's okay. Let's just go back to work. That's okay, right? I told myself that, and I accepted that. So like after that, I actually went back to work for one more year, and 1 year later, I was like, let's try again. Let's forget everything that you told yourself a year ago.
You've learned so much from that. Just from hearing you talk about it, like, who cares if you didn't jump to the biggest pond in the world? Like, having that day to day, I mean, like, you realize that you were running yourself to the ground at that point, and then, like, your solution was to put even more effort on top of all the effort doing it. And then eventually, like, the keyword here is, like, the macro environments, right? Like, stuff that are slightly out of your control kind of affects what happened. But there's not a single thing that tells me that you regretted that. There's not a single thing about whether you're talking about nearly bankrupting and even talking about being brutally honest with your landlord to be like, look, no matter what, it's not going to end up well. Like
You're
that.
not getting money.
That lesson is incredible. So I'm so glad you just shared that, because a lot of people think about like, oh no, there's no way out. There's nothing about this. But no, like life just goes on, and then you acknowledged what happened. You gave full-time job another shot, and then eventually you founded Zerion. So actually, before I want to get into that, this is maybe a stupid question. I get the opportunity to ask this, but as a certified Java trainer for many years during that time, and having seen so much of it, Do you also hate Eclipse?
I absolutely do. It is so heavyweight. Like there was a period of time that you cannot escape Eclipse because like the somehow the gravity just all pointed. I mean, in the early days, right, you have many IDEs, and then Eclipse came about. It was the new kid in the block. I have absolutely no idea how it became the giant that it did, but it did. It was the giant, and it eventually became the only thing. Um, and this is before the revolution of just well, there was a few years that um, after that people would just like heck, I'm just using a text editor. I just didn't care about IDE anymore. But yeah, to answer your question, I absolutely don't like how bloated it is.
That's one of the facts of life. That's one of the truths of life that I know everybody who's used Eclipse, nobody has ever liked it. So maybe this is, I don't know, it's a conspiracy. I'll take 30 seconds on this because like I've said this a couple of times, but Java owned by Oracle, or did it? Was it owned by Sun's company?
Yeah,
Anyways,
Sun Microsystem.
at some point, maybe Sun's Microsystem also owned it. But what I do believe is that they're so present in schools is because nobody will admit this, but I'm sure Oracle is paying whether the university directly or whether some third party to like force in quotation marks everybody to learn Java. And also, if I could apply the same logic, I'm sure they were a role in part of making Eclipse like so locked down that everybody had to do Eclipse, everybody had to do Java. I don't have any proof. Like nobody sue me on this or whatever. But over the years, this conspiracy thing is that I'm telling you, Oracle had definitely a piece of that maniacal plan of getting everybody to do Java at university, everybody to do Eclipse. I'm sure they had responsibility in there.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you this. I am in Java before Oracle took over, and I basically left the ecosystem when Oracle bought when Oracle bought Sun, right? So now I would say prior to that, prior to Oracle owning everything like MySQL, Java, and whatnot, um, they were great.
We could leave it at that. We could
Right.
definitely leave it at
Just
that.
stop at that.
Oh my goodness. But I mean, I don't even know where the rest of this conversation is going to go because you've had so much good tips and so many good stories about everything, right? Coming to America, learning the new landscape, but also like giving yourself a chance to start things and to like go through the ringer basically and having like, living the highs and the lows of it. So then after that, you told yourself about a year ago that you were not going to do this to yourself again. You were not going to go through this whole process of like trying to start something and being like, oh, entrepreneurship or like business is not for me at the end of the day. It's something that was in the back of your mind. But as we know, like that did not stop you. That is not the end game. That was not the truth of all of that. So about a year later, after doing the full-time role and everything, how did that happen into the, the story of Zerion?
Well, so again, I talked about this in the beginning. It was not romantic. It was not an epiphany. None of those. It was just like 1 year into this job. The job was great. The boss was great. The company was great. I was managing about 20 developers at the time, two separate teams. Um, it was good. Life was actually quite good. Good money. I got married. My first son was born. Like it was great. I mean, I was living the American dream. I bought a house. Like everything was like slowly coming into pieces. And then I was like, oh my god, like I still want to work for myself. Um, so so I started actually. The funny thing was it was very similar. Where I start to look for jobs. I thought like this is so boring now. I start to just start to listen. I wasn't planning to leave the company, but I have my ears open and answering calls. Um, and back then, and this is like 2003, four, maybe three, four, five. I don't exactly know, like, but it's during that era where as a developer, you got job offers all the time. You got offered to jump to contracts. So I start listening to those contracts, and then ending up knowing this, that hey, if I like how does is staffing business work, and these contractors. So what happens is when they place you, you get paid a certain hourly rate. Let's say $20, for example. The agency will get $10 sometimes, $20 sometimes. And I learned that after talking to many agencies and who wants to recruit me. And I was like, seems like a lot of money here. Maybe I should just become an agency. so so that's what my thought process was. So I start accepting contract, leaving the full time job, and then got this contract, got this agency, and start learning how this thing work. And so the beginning of Zerion Software was a staffing agency. Um, and I told my agent at the time that, hey, if you got new requirements, like you don't have, you just send them to me. I can fill those for you. I'll take $2. Whatever you pay me, you pay me 20. You pay me the same amount. I'll just take $2 and I'll pay the next guy $2 less. How's that? And then the guy's like, okay, well, we'll see. And then I end up out recruiting him. Um, or he was lazy. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. I mean, like I was like, whatever requirement you get, just throw it through me. I know people. I didn't, but I know people, and then I can recruit, right? So learning that, I end up. So in the next few years, I end up. I say we because it's now a team. We ended up in Fannie Mae, and there was a period of time that Fannie Mae, I think maybe Freddie Mac too, in the U.S. they were hiring so many contractors. It's crazy. Like probably 10, 20, 50 contractors on orientation daily. It's just mind-boggling amount of contractors they hire. So they need a lot of agencies. And I ended up, when I first got into that Fannie Mae contract, we were maybe 3 levels down. And what that means is Fannie Mae will pay an agency. That agency will find another agency. That agency will find another agency. And that agency will find the people, right? So like if Fannie Mae is paying $100, then the worker, us, will end up getting whatever, $10. The $90 was eaten by the agencies, right? Layer by layer, right? So when we first get into that Fannie Mae contract, we were maybe third layer, fourth layer down. In the next few years, I systematically tear down this thing, and we became the prime contractor. Um, and if you want to get into that story, maybe like we have to. Um, yeah, I don't remember everything, but it was a few years of like a lot of politics, understanding how it works, relationship, and eventually I stopped doing that, mainly because I found myself, oh my god, like we're like now prime contractor. We basically took away all the layers, um, and of course ending up making a lot more money. But then I look at myself as like my time was, at the time I was running a team of maybe 15 people. All of them work for me, right? They make money for me. Every hour they work, I make money. I mean, it's crazy. It's not right. It's like is it should not be ethically correct to have this kind of business. But there it was, and I found myself. I was like technically a system architect, right? Slash project manager. So every day, 8 hours a day, I'll spend about half an hour doing real software slash project work. And 7.5 hours will be politics. Will be like, I need to know which manager will get a promotion, which manager's friend with which manager who has a hand in IT, because you need IT support for running any project. Um, and I need to know who to have lunch with, who to have dinner with, who the friend was, and I hated life. So that is when I say, well, I don't want this life, right? So I could at the time I was already like, and people was like, oh my god, like how were you able to do this in like 2 to 3 years? We were here for like 10 plus years. We're still 2 layers down. And I was like, but I didn't want this work. I didn't want that to be my identity. I didn't want that to be the rest of my life. So that is when I said to the team and myself, like, we have to start doing products. We cannot just be in staffing agency. And that's when the next chapter starts.
Yeah, the word you're screaming is pivot, basically. Understanding
Right.
that, like, and even like till today, people use the word agency, and like some people already like have a bad connotation behind it. And you were describing a bit of the inner works, where it's like, yeah, it's like agency fighting other agencies, trying to like get to the top of like being on the first row and all that. And the fact that you're able to really just see it from the inside out, and even just like in quotation marks, winning a little bit in there, that is actually so cool to hear. I'm not saying it's a good system. I'm not saying it's a good environment. I'm not saying it's a good like place to be working, but I think you sharing so much of how that works is so informational at the end of the day. When we talk about these pivots, then this is where we're like, you already mentioned about iForm Builder, and obviously I'm not gonna spend like, 'cause Zerion, what is it, 20 plus years now, 21, 23? Like, I know you're smiling after all that, so I'm mostly not gonna talk about every single year that's happened over there, but even just recapping that for the people who are familiar with Zerion Software, it's also available online. Go check it out. One of the products that they do is the iForm Builder. Basically, if you think about whether it's like a large inventory of people trying to collect data manually with like, not only just manually, but one of the use case, for example, you use your mobile, it could be also offline. Those are all the different ways of doing it. But then there's also other cool practical use cases, even in school environments and hospital environments, that is available to do it. So that's really one of the core products of Zerion Software. And I definitely know, I don't want to say I definitely know, but you had a role to play in all of this, to getting it together, to getting from, hey, you have a bunch of people who can help you out, to just turn all of it to be like, let's pump out products to begin with. So maybe the question that I'm trying to ask over here is that we talk about evolution of a company, evolution of a product, and evolution of like these transition phases. So maybe from you, like, people are scared of transitions. I'm just saying this as a general platitude in general. What was your framework or reasoning when you had to do a transition? So, for example, going from a staff agency to building products, like, did you already have a playbook? Did you have a guidebook? Did you
No.
dig
Well,
frameworks or anything?
the guidance is like, you gotta hate current enough to jump, right? So I knew at the time, I don't want I love to solve problems, right? I want to solve problems. I want to do software stuff, right? So I don't want my life to be like learning golf just to play with certain VPs in order to get the next contract. I just don't like that, right? So so if your question is right, how do you pivot? How do you jump to the next big thing? I say be open minded, and and know what you don't want. And I think that's more important. I know the world always talk about. I mean, it's easy, cliche to say, well, no, trying to figure out what you do want. What you want is hard. I mean, I don't know. Like, I just want, like, people say, I want more money. I want to do less, right? Well, yeah, but in how? Like, there's no simple way of telling you what this is. This is going to work. It's not. I tell people, like, by default, it's not going to work. That's why you have to work hard, right? If if it's going to work, it would have already worked already, right? So by default, it's not going to work, and you have to change it. But the question is, can you say you enjoy current situation? If you are whatever, right? Let's say you're a teacher at a high school. You love that. Well, then don't complain and be happy. If you complain, do something about it, right? So I always say, if you complain, just do something about anything. Like, do something at night, on Saturdays. That's okay. I'm all for people taking small risks. You don't have to take big risks, right? So going back to what I was like doing staffing, and I know that we want to do products. Um, and we went through many iterations. I still remember we were in Fannie Mae, right? So we did accounting software for Fannie Mae, and I was like, oh my god, like we're gonna change accounting. We're so going to change the entire how people account for numbers, right? And I remember I argue with CPAs, um, like crazy arrogant. And I went to so at the time we created a couple of these products, accounting related products, and I went to the CFO conference full of CFOs, and I start asking people like, oh, how do you do this? How do you solve this problem? And everybody looked at me like, what are you talking about? And so it turns out the problems that we learn within Fannie Mae only applicable to a giant like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. So there in the world there are two customers. One is Fannie Mae, one is Freddie Mac, and I was like, there's no one outside of this little world understand or have these problems. Now I didn't know, right? Because to my world is that my entire accounting world. So I start realizing, okay, oh my god, like nobody cares, nobody knows, so there's no market. I should just do something else. And of course, right? So that's when it turns into the world turns into 2008, and then iOS came about, um, and we start developing for the iOS. And another story was, so this is 2008. This is an election year. I remember I talked about doing that fall, right, from fall to winter. I told like Chris at the time, my partner at the time, and I said, well, just go get any software, any mobile thing, whatever it is, doesn't matter, mobile anything will do. And then one Sunday afternoon, I got an email um, forwarded from a few people, and it says, uh, "We need an iOS developer. Deadline is midnight," and that's it. That line is midnight tonight. And then Chris forwarded to me. I remember I was like on I forgot what phone was I on. Of course, not an iPhone. Um, one of those that has a keyboard and it's also not a BlackBerry. It was a Motorola. And I read that as we just came back from church, pulling into the garage, and I saw this email that says we need an iOS developer deadline tonight, and I just stopped the car in the garage, respond to Chris and say, well, go say yes. All right, I say, go ahead and say yes. I'll take that. And I turn around, talk to my wife, and we have a very young baby at the time. And I told my wife, well, take care of baby. I'm not sleeping tonight. And that night, I delivered that product or that app at 2 a.m. So I missed the deadline. Um, but but I did deliver an app to them at 2 a.m. And that app was called Twitter Vote Report. Um, it is crazy because Twitter was so new at the time that um, that app, what they want, what the people of that group wants, is an app for people to report the situation on the voting situation. How long is the line? Did anything interesting or bad happen? Right, basically a report, right, live report, and that is a very simple data collection app. It has one form, three questions. How was the voting situation? It was like it was also designed to be tweetable. So in the app, you will answer these three questions, and it will send a tweet out. Now, Twitter was extremely new at the time, 2008, and that app ended up getting some award. Some news channel picked up this vote report thing at the time, um, and that launched into like all these things about building forms. And there's a side story where a couple years ago I worked for another company who I built a product for them on Windows Mobile. So the two things merged, and I was like, well, maybe I can do this kind of inspection-ish product in this brand new platform. And that's when iPhone Builder was born.
I've got so much to take away from what you just said, or what you just like that story even to begin with. And also back then, 2008, 2009, when the first iPhone, or like the very beginning stage of it, every single app that comes out, the one that like where you could pretend you're drinking beer or something, like
Right.
those kind of thing took off. But the cool thing that I could take away from this is when I talk about, I'll throw out the word idea factory. It's not that you're the one generating ideas, that you are working in an idea factory environment, whether you're the one picking up the job, whether you told yourself, I'll do it myself at 2 a.m. That's always like what's screaming in my head, that like, it's maybe luck, it's maybe skill, but the fact that you had people feeding you ideas and you really take up the challenge to it, nobody could decide tomorrow, I want to have that environment, right? You really just like were breathing it. So I think that's one of the cool things that I took away from that. And obviously, like, I'm sure that's not one example. As you were saying, you already threw out like 2, 3, 4 examples, and as you build more and more together, I think that kind of gave you that educated guess. Because I keep on saying that, like, my original question in terms of like, how do you like are convinced enough to make this transition? How do you convey this message that it's a good idea? How do you lead people and drag other people into like this movement of, hey, we can't do staffing agency anymore, we're going to build stuff for other people, and it ends up being like that. Your educated guess of like talking to CFOs and talking to the actual people that need these products really just help make the decision at the end. So a lot simpler said than done, but I think your backing of your stories always help out with that. I can't be a tech podcast if there's not this question about like technology evolution, or more like technology tools evolution. I mean, it's 2025. We talk about this all the time, all the time. But through Zerion Software, you've seen that more than just the past 2, 3, 4 years. You've seen that through decades. So maybe this is a great opportunity to ask, like, tech evolution, how people build software. That's like, if I had a question with tagline is tech evolution, how do people build software? So what was the major differences, or the major, like, I guess, like chapters when you were building so much software for so many different people? You could start wherever you want, but basically it's going to lead us to today in terms of how it's being built today. But
so when we start in 2009, iOS was new, right? So the first thing I want to talk about was that we decided to jump onto using iOS as the main platform. Not because I can foresee how big iOS would become, but because I just want to play in an arena that is less competition, right? So at the time, I still remember the next year, 2010, iPad came out. So the iPad came out, I started doing presentation on iPhone Builder with the iPad. And then I had people laugh at me. Well, not really laugh out loud, but like questioning me and say, hey, if you're building business apps, build it on BlackBerry, build it on Windows. I mean, this iOS thing is just for fun. Like you said, like people make beer app. In the first Christmas, 2008, the top apps are farting apps. Like people build apps that will fart in different ways. Like it's all just play and fun, and nobody was doing anything major serious in iOS. Now it's very different. So yeah, number one thing I want to talk about is we start playing in this arena. Mobile development was new, and that to me, I love it because when I was in school, we went through a lot of trouble learning how to maximize memory, how to build better algorithm that runs faster and whatnot. And then when I get into the real world, nobody cares because the CPU will get so fast the next year, memory will get so much next year. Who cares if you have memory leak? It's okay, just let it leak. And then next year, you have more memory to leak. Who cares? So like, I was like very unhappy about the industry because, well, that in the back of my mind, that makes, well, yeah, even if you're a lousy developer, you can get by because memory leaks is okay, bad algorithm is okay. Why would I spend hours and days and months like tweeting, thinking, like not sleeping over some algorithm that will run like 10 times faster? Who cares? your CPU will get 10 times faster in 2 years or even 1 year, right? So it didn't matter. Now, not until mobile. When mobile came about, it all went back to the 80s. Like now you have to worry about memory, CPU power, and whatnot. Now that makes us, and I will say us, like good old old software engineer, computer scientist is like, oh my god, like now you young people, now you realize you have to worry about memory. You have to clear your memory. You have to release, right? And so talking about development, it went through that period where the entire world was already so used to not have to worry about these fundamentals, and then in the mobile world now they have to worry about the fundamentals. Um, and back in now in 2025, you don't have to worry about again. Anyway, so that's one thing I want to talk about. Another thing is cloud computing. When we start in 2009 and 10, there were people talked about cloud was still new. When we go sell to the enterprises, they always ask to be on premise. They want they want their computers. They big companies still had server rooms in their offices, right? May not be in the same location, maybe they share, but big companies will have people like in Fannie Mae, right? Fannie Mae have server rooms, and when we were selling iForum, we will go in saying we're cloud based, and then everybody wants to put it on their own server, and we have to say no. And so like that is another period of time where cloud was not prime, and then of course next few years it become prime. um, and that led to like I'm not correctly answer your question, but that led to SaaS, where subscription wasn't the main thing how people sell at the time, but we push ahead, right? We were selling subscription, and that was new to people. It took actually, now it sounds crazy, but it took us many years to finally say, okay, we will charge by users. Even I still remember, I mean, people who were with us at the time would argue, what is a user? Like, well, a user is a seed. Is it a seed? Well, nobody see it, right? In the past, you would see it, right? So you have a computer, that is a user. Well, but how about mobile? How about people have iPhone and iPad? Do you count two licenses? Well, then people will scream. How about an iPhone, an iPod Touch, an iPad, maybe on a browser? How many licenses? And we debate so much now. Right now, it becomes easy. We're selling usernames, and each username can be used in 5 devices. Now, I can say it out loud but there were so many years of argument of what a user means. So I'm talking about from developing to cloud computing to selling subscription rather than licenses, right? So at the time, that was still a lot of our competitors and our friends are selling development plus maintenance. So you will sell into an enterprise where I'll charge you whatever $100,000, and then 10K per year for maintenance, right? So you have the software, I'll put it into your environment on premise, but then we go into cloud computing. So cloud and SaaS kind of changed the industry, how people think about. Um, and we were extremely lucky to be in this SaaS trend, because that makes it a lot easier for recurring revenue. And then, although it's smaller chunks of money in the beginning, but it's recurring, and people like would not have to resell every single year. Um, and so that's mobile, that's cloud. The way to develop um, I think like when we went through PHP time, okay, in the very beginning was PHP, and then Node.js, okay, and then the dream of front end and back end all in JavaScript. And nowadays it's kind of like that. But then you, the crazy thing, it's all always the time is if I may like zoom back into Java, right? When Java came about, it was to dream about write once, run anywhere, right? That was the slogan. That was never true. It was kind of true, not quite true. And that drive of cross-platform, just do it once, it will automatically run everywhere. It is still well alive today, right? That dream, okay, is not being realized. I don't think will ever be realized. I have this debate with people. It will never be realized, and we can debate that if you want. It will never be realized, and that will go around like the industry will go separate ways. Like you will develop for iOS and Android separately, and then something put it back together. React Native, Flutter will put it back together, and then we'll go separate ways again. So that is that Java um, was trying to make it common, and then when Java goes into the backend, it's called Java Beans for people old enough. Um, is to drive to like one thing to rule them all: backend, front end, everything, same language, same platform, same idea. You learn it once, and again, it's the same thing. It will just never realize. Back end and front end are different. They're done by different people. So the drive to put them all together, even like today, we can see it. Everything is JavaScript, okay? But it's different JavaScript. You can't like a front end focused developer who can do front end JavaScript is different. Yes, you learn JavaScript, but it's still different. So it doesn't quite matter. So don't worry too much um, about these things driving all together. So like I just want to like go through the time when we went into Node.js thinking that front end and back end will be the same, and then eventually it didn't. And of course now we're going more into the Python world, where from Zerion's perspective, we never fully get into the Python world.
No, I mean like the way you were breaking down the segment is so cool because like the answer encapsulated on the technology side, even going from on-premise service to cloud servers, like sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's really not until you point it out. So there's that aspect that you already touched. And then the other aspect of like talking about which platform that you kind of commit a little bit into, and then like putting, a little bit of trust in the platform. That's another way of looking at this. And then of course, like you definitely shed some light on the business side. It's impossible to talk about tech without business at the end of the day, because or else how would you have something running for over 20 plus years and having all these different like challenges coming up? Like you do have to care about the business. So like really your answer encapsulated all that. But one is that when you were talking about like the problems is cyclical and it comes back. At some point you have infinite memory and you have infinite storage, but then like the mobile apps came in and it's like, oh wait, we got to care about our bundle sizes on how we ship it to the app store. And then at some point you were saying like, oh, but nowadays it's getting more and more fine because like mobile apps are getting like more and more like efficient and all that. I'm going to lead ourselves into this other new challenge, this new chapter of like, we got to think about memory and we got to think about all these efficiency again because of this era of all these LLM models and all these AI models and all that kind of stuff. It's a new challenge. People are fighting for GPUs, people are fighting for compute memory and all that kind of stuff. So I'm assuming that has affected also your landscape at Zerion Software in terms of, do you feel like you're going back to that age again to be like, how do we think about memory? How do we think about using this in your day-to-day workflow to build stuff?
Well, not exactly that, but it's very similar, right? So I equate the ChatGPT as the iPhone moment, right? So like I keep talking about the iPhone moment when the iPhone came about. You can draw a line actually in the history of mobile phones, draw a solid line, and everything released after the iPhone released looked dramatically different. And you can too draw a line on when ChatGPT was released about 2 years ago. Now, this line may be a little bit thicker. The transition time may be a little bit longer, but everything changed. every software, everything that was released was influenced by this one moment, is the ChatGPT moment, right? So that I can equate, and that's why I'm spending a lot of energy in thinking about like how do we take advantage of the new era. Um, Now we could give up and say, okay, well, this is it. I mean, I'll go fishing, I'll go to the beach, right? Um, or we have to jump in. And to me, this is equally exciting. And I talked about at the time, I was like, well, let's sell everything and jump into mobile. Well, we should do the same here, right? Now we have a business, so we cannot just stop it, but we need to jump in. And there's a window of opportunity for whoever is listening. Um, right now, if you are if you even know what vibe coding is, right? It may sound like obvious for people of your listener, but just knowing what vibe coding is, you're already on the top um, single digit number percentage of all developers in the world. Like I talk about vibe coding so much in the last couple of months, and 80%. I mean, don't quote me scientifically, but roughly 80% of people I talk to basically dismiss it, right? It's like, and again, think about my circle is a lot of tech people, a lot of high level software developers, entrepreneurs, CTOs, right? 80% of them dismissed the future of vibe coding. Now, if you're hearing this and you too are dismissing, I won't debate you, okay? Um, it is not good today. Just like self-driving car is not good maybe 5 years ago, right? It's still not good. You can argue it's not perfect. But right now, I think if we take self-driving car as an example, you can see the trajectory, right? If I tell you I want me and my son and my grandkid to be drivers, you say that's crazy, right? Why would you spend all your energy learning a craft that is going to be replaced? Right now, we can see extremely clearly cars are going to drive themselves, right? No debate there. And I'm going to tell you, code will be written on their own. Okay, vibe coding. It may take a long time. Okay, don't get me wrong. Like self-driving car took, I mean, decades to realize, right? So vibe coding may, I mean, uh, agent that write code on their own may take a long time to be perfect. It may never get into perfect, but the percentage will slowly go up. If we say like there are people, CEO Anthropic say 80% by 2025, I think like because where he is, okay, he probably see 80%. Um, and I think Meta and Microsoft is saying 20%, maybe Google is saying 20%. Whatever the percentage is, what I want to tell the audience is that I cannot see it. I cannot see that trend turning around. With all the money, everybody go into that trend's not going to turn around. So you got to ask yourself, where do you want to be on this trend line? Do you want to be ahead of it? Now, ahead of it may be risky. Behind it, also risky. So knowing this trend, you got to think about where do you want to put yourself on this trend line. And I mean, I can tell you where I am. I start to train and hire teams that are not allowed to code. They have to vibe code. Now, because this is a new skill, vibe coding turns English into programming language. And this is a brand new programming language that nobody were ever formally trained on. And maybe it could be formally trained, I don't know. But it's a new programming language you all have to learn. It is not simple. It is not like you can't just go to Lovable and say I type in a few sentences and it will work. It's not, right? It will never actually. So my prediction is that vibe coding creates we speak English, so I would say English as the programming language, and this is a new skill. And if you're listening to this, I recommend you at least learn that and see how fast it is growing. And if you can get on that train, you should be, right? This is my recommendation. You should be the one who be called when your friends hear about vibe coding, right? Be that person, right? Remember in high school, I was that person. I was like, anybody who's like, oh my God, like I hear this computer thing, they want to buy a new computer, they call me, right? Be that person. Be that person who in your circle, when your friends, your neighbors, your customers, your boss hear about vibe coding or AI development, be the person that they will call. And then you get the opportunity, right? So I think in this podcast we talked about, well, how do you obtain opportunity? And Perry, you talk about the idea factory, right? So be that person. Like people have to know that you know stuff, right? Um, and right now, I will recommend you at least look into that. And I understand it writes spaghetti code, it is this and that and whatnot. But trust me, it will get better. And go learn.
What's crazy is that everything you're saying right now is so relatable to my scenario specifically. I talk for myself, but I also talk to other people that work in my kind of spaces. We we get given a lot of tools. I'll shout out Cursor, I'll shout out all these other ones where they are so prominent, they're so present, and like everybody at any tech companies nowadays, like you gotta use it. So the way you're saying that people need to learn English as a programming language, like that's the simplest way for people to understand it, because that's exactly what's happening. I'll say it, companies are doing this. Companies are telling software engineers to write better English. It sounds
Right.
crazy, but that's what happens. And I've been in enough meetings nowadays that I'm like, you could have written that differently. And it would have done like just so much more efficient. So as you were saying, it's a learning curve at that point. So thanks for sharing so much of that. I think it's absolutely wild. One thing that I keep on picking up every time you talk about these great stories and these new ideas, like you have so many ideas and so many like ways to apply things. My question is, how do you apply those things, or where do you apply those ideas nowadays? I know you still spend a lot of time with Zerion Software, but I believe you also have a role to play with the Zenith Venture Studio, where when we're talking about all these ideas, I mean, sure, a person can have a million ideas, but if you don't do anything with them, how does that work? So maybe to introduce real quickly from you, actually, like this venture environment that you got, is that where you brain dump your idea and put it into action, or what exactly is that space for?
Well, so I mean, I can talk about why I co-founded this venture studio, and it's when I project myself, right? I'm in my 50s, right? So soon I'll get into traditional retireable age, right? So when I think about that, I want to create something that I can work until my 90s. Okay, that may sound crazy, but I do still want to work. Now, how am I going to work? I'm not going to be able to not sleep, right? In my 20s, I was able to not sleep. Right now, I cannot. So this is a projection of, if I want to create a platform, something that I could continue to thrive and have excitement slash working late in my life, how do I create that? And the answer is something like that. Now, it may or may not work. So this venture studio is simply put, is it think about it as a factory that I mean, all of us will start dreaming about what is available, what is cool. Then let's quickly prototype it. Let's test it on the market. If it works, then let's launch it. Now I may not be the one who's driving it, but I'll help now do something crazy, right? So in 5 years, something crazy will show up, and if we can make this sustainable, then I have a playground to always play with the coolest toy, right? I can stay young, so to speak, right? So that's the basic idea. That's a very selfish concept of like just projecting, trying to create something that I can continue to do cool things. So that's what it is.
And I absolutely appreciate how you're able to like call it a playground as well, because every playground is not guaranteed that something's gonna come out of it. But then sometimes you have the best sandcastle in a playground at the end of the day. So that's really I like the way you the perspective you're putting on that. That it's a never ending I guess like evolution of being able to use your ideas and help other people join that movement as well. Speaking of other people though, like obviously you were describing so many like examples of products you've built and example of like meetings that you attended. There's a lot of people involved, and one of the skills that we should have probably touched more on, but when we talk about human relationships and even able to like leadership and all that kind of stuff, you would not be able to do everything you've described without that at the end of the day. So one thing that I do know is that you've accumulated all that into a book. You've slightly mentioned it a little bit earlier, but this book kind of came out around 2 years ago. It's called Craft Your World, Create a Life Worth Living Through Entrepreneurship. Is that the theme of it? Is the theme of the book centered around your human relationships with other people in this environment, or was it more about the spirit of being able to create stuff, but also not just products, but also creating teams and creating companies around it?
Yeah, I mean, it is creating life, and of course, your life, right? So I describe your world, right? So I say you don't have to change the world, which is a cliche that we startup people like to say. So you don't have to change the world, you change your world. And what's your world? Your world, everybody's world is but 150 people. Your world is people. Like you don't like, yeah, I know, like physically you live on Earth, but you interact with people around you. And if you shape who you interact with, you shape your world. And so now, did I talk about leadership? Of course. And I subscribe to servant leadership. And we can go down that path, right? But I mean, basically, there's a chapter that talks about if you assume everybody is lazy and stupid, they will be. And so don't assume everybody around you is lazy and stupid, because they will be if you assume that. But if you assume they work hard and they're trustworthy, they will do the best, then they will be too, right? So now debate debate on that trajectory. I'm not going to like do that here, but coming back to the book, it's about crafting your world. And I think if you think about your world being 150 people around you, the easiest way to shape that is by entrepreneurship, because working, I mean, consumes so much of our time and our involvement with people. So if you can control who you work with, then you shape a lot of your world. Now, I'm not saying it's easy, but if you want to control your world, running your own thing, doing your own business, starting your own gig is the easiest way to create your own world or to shape your own world.
It's so intentional. I think everything you're mentioning is that like you didn't explicitly say this, but like life ain't gonna wait for you. As in like it's whether you want to do it, you want to grab it, you want to use everything that you've learned and then build these relationships, build these projects, build these companies. That's such a theme that I really appreciate when you're putting not just this example of the book that you've written, but also all the other ventures and all the other work projects that you're working on at the moment. So that's so exciting. I always want to come back to Z at the end of the day. Is that maybe it's a very simple question, maybe it's not, but what are your favorite apps? As in, it sounds dumb, but like top 3 favorite apps or top 3 any tools that you've recently had appreciation for. Some people will be like, I can't live without Slack. Like, forget about Teams. I have to have Slack. But maybe in your space, is there any like tools or any kind of like software that you want to give shout outs to?
I mean, right now I love Claude Code, right? I call it CC, right? So Claude Code is amazing. Now I use AI a lot, right? I use Claude as my co-developer. I use Claude Code as my developer, and I use ChatGPT a lot. And I simply just use Apple Note, right? So way back when, I started on BlackBerry Note, and the cool thing is you can jot down your idea anytime, right? So you have your BlackBerry, and it syncs with your computer, and you can always trust it's there. Then it became Evernote, So Evernote was once really big, and we have Evernote on mobile, on PC, and everywhere. And I don't know why, and I don't know how we don't use Evernote anymore. And now Apple Note took its place. So I use now Apple Note. Now people use Notion and whatnot, but I use Apple Note religiously. I want to start creating like a so I got in a little bit into Obsidian, which is another note-taking app, but I didn't go into it enough to recommend that. So, like if you talk about things I cannot live without right now, I would say Apple Note and Cloud Code, right? So I get more and more into like when I brainstorming. So like I'm starting now. I'm not there yet, but I'm starting to have a routine where I will set up a meeting with ChatGPT. So I did that in 2 mornings, and I just set up time, and I say, okay, well, let's start thinking about that. Like so, recently I'm researching what I'm calling Software 3.0, which is AI first. Like, what would an AI first development look like? And you kind of ask about that, and that required a thought. And so I was doing research with ChatGPT, right? On my side, we'll discuss, and I say, well, how about you go find this thing, come back to me, and I was thinking about something else. And in one of these sessions, so that's maybe 2 weeks ago, maybe last week, ChatGPT came up with a few research paper, and then I didn't read them all. I put them into NotebookLM, and NotebookLM's summarizing it, making a podcast. So I start listening to it when I was driving. The next day I come back, I then turn to Claude and I say, okay, well, listening to that, using these research projects, let's start to brainstorm, assuming this world is true 2, 3, 4, 5 years later, what kind of companies should we try? What kind of ideas should we try? What kind of business should we try? And then start to just start to brainstorm. So that's a long way of answering your question. I'm trying to put myself into, like, now that I have so much help, I want to be able to work faster.
Yeah, I'm glad I asked these questions. Every time, like, I ask, like, what tools do people appreciate? There's one way of answering, be like, these 3. But then you also gave the synergy, right? Like, how do you use all these tools together? That's always something I'm like, oh, wow, that's how people use tools. So I'll never stop asking this question. And the way you answered it gives us exactly why people appreciate that. I'm a big Apple Notes fan. I'm the only idiot who never actually syncs it to the cloud. So if, honestly, knock on wood, I lose it, it's all gone. Oh, that's another tangent for another. Yeah, that's a tangent for another thing. Or one of my favorite Siri command is like, "Hey Siri, new note," and then you just say it, and it appears on the notes. That's always fantastic. So thank you to all the Apple developers who are making notes better from time to time. I cannot let you leave the show without talking about podcast. You appear very, very often on a podcast. Obviously, the link's gonna be at the bottom of this description. You'll definitely check it out. But what is that about?
Well, if you speak Cantonese, and if you're in the startup ecosystem, go listen to that. In a nutshell, right? It's called Hong Kong Startup DAO. In a simple sense, it's just a few friends talk about, like, have a fun conversation. So it's a very, very casual podcast. It's not like this where we have question and answer. Usually it's a topic that we just chat. So it's very casual. Among us, we have a VC, we have me, like a tech CEO, we have project manager, product manager, we have younger founders, we have UX people. Like, so it's a group of friends share their opinion on the latest trend. So lately, of course, we have been talking about AI. Fundamentally, what this podcast was created was trying to get more people to join the startup world. I mean, that's my life mission, if you haven't noticed. So yeah, I want to share more on the startup ecosystem. I want to encourage more people to do more startups, especially now. So if you're into that, go listen to that. give us some feedback on how to do better. In the past, we've also done like through this name some workshops. So there are some people who are talking about, well, why don't we do a vibe coding workshop to the Hong Kong, like larger Hong Kong people community, right? Because there are many people from Hong Kong all over the world. And actually, the hosts in this podcast mostly are not in Hong Kong. So we have people in UK, in Canada, I'm in US, we have in Hong Kong. So it's fun. So listen to that, and hopefully you will join us. And we'll invite you, Perry, to join us in Cantonese if you can, if you can still speak in that.
搞掂冇問題。咁就but no, honestly, I keep on saying like, where has the time gone? All that kind of fun stuff. Z, where could people find you? I know you do so many things left and right, and Zerion Software is definitely fully thriving in this new environment. As you keep on saying, it's always changing all the time. But what is the best way to find you? Any kind of socials you want to share?
Find me on LinkedIn. You should be able to just search my name. I'm more public than I want to. Search my name on LinkedIn. You should be able to find me. If not, go to zwong.com. I'm there too. I don't update that often enough. So I'm more update on LinkedIn. So if you want to find me, go to LinkedIn. Or actually, I'm experimenting. Go to ChatGPT and search up a GPT connect with Zwong. See if you can find it. I don't know if you can find it. And that I'm trying to build this GPT as my secretary. So if you can find it, let me know. It'd be cool. So you can book a meeting to me from this GPT if you can make it work.
Wow, yeah, just a one-stop shop for everything. But of course, all the links will be shared in the description notes below. So definitely check out everything about Z, about Zerion Software, about the book Craft Your World, Create a Life Worth Living Through Entrepreneurship, about Zenith Venture Studio. I could go on and on and on, but it's been an absolute pleasure on my end to hear all that. So Z, I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for being on the show.
You're welcome. Thank you. Love it.
And of course, I will definitely catch the rest of y'all on the next one. See ya, bye. And that was Sze Wong, founder and CEO of Zerion Software. All the links are shared in the description notes below. Go check them out. If you would like to be on Podcast Written by a Software Engineer, reach out to us. Just email contact@perrytiu.com. Can't wait to have you on the show. Once again, thank you so much for listening to Podcast Written by a Software Engineer. Don't forget to hit the follow button on your podcast app and leave us a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It's completely free. And if you want to tell your friends about Podcast Written by a Software Engineer, that's totally cool as well. Anyways, I'm Perry Tiu, and you've been listening to Podcast Written by a Software Engineer.